Welcome to another edition of Nostr News.
We're live, baby. We're back.
Back doing it.
Yeah.
And we were trying to piece through what happened this summer. I feel like we've kind of, with my travel schedule, your travel schedule, we've had a tough time convening. So it's fun to see you back in the studio.
Likewise, man. I was saying it's been way too long, and yeah, maybe let's start there. Like, what have you been up to this summer? I mean, I know we'll talk a lot about Nostr, but yeah, how have you been?
I'm good. We've been, we spend a lot of the summers in Mammoth Lakes in the mountains. And so we were up there and, we were doing a lot of kind of just online connected stuff there, but not being able to hang out in real life. So it's fun to be able to do this. Oh, and I think we talked about the India trip, right? Right when we got back from India in June, we did one in person here. So we were traveling a lot, and we just came back like late last week. So it's kind of like all the Bay Area energy feels fresh and new. And I know we're gonna go hang out later on at DZ's office. So it's nice to
DZHQ, baby, let's go.
It's nice to be back because I think that kind of stuff, the mountains, we don't have that type of kind of tech builder energy out there. So, and
you picked a great time to come back. This is like one of the most beautiful days in SF.
I always say September, October are the best months in the Bay Area,
without a doubt.
This is it. It feels kind of Southern California weather.
I'll take it, man. I'll take it. T-shirt, I like it. Nostr, hey, I should have worn Nostrasia because that's coming up. But.
Yeah. Do you have a Nostrasia shirt already?
I do. Yeah, the yellow ones are very cool. I wore.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, with some of my friends that are, I guess more into Japan. They saw the Japanese flag in there. Very well done by Sam Lightning Store. So.
And do you have some like Onitsuka tigers that you can like retrofit with?
I don't even know what an Onitsuka tiger is. What is that?
Those are those like classic Japanese sport shoe.
Oh,
the one that did you ever read the Nike?
The shoe dog thing?
Yeah.
I ate like a long time ago.
There was like the shoe brand that he resold to make Nike what it is.
Oh, nice.
So right, like you start out a shoe company, you start out selling other people's shoes, this is whatever in the 70s. And he sort of built that to be his like retail channel and distribution in California. So I think he was selling Onitsuka tigers in California.
Oh yeah.
And then he had all the relationship with the shoe makers, and he's like, I'm gonna design my own shoes, right? So
yeah, badass. I remember I listened to that as an audiobook like 5-6 years ago. It was great.
Yeah, when it first came out, it was a lot of fun. And wasn't there were like two of them, I think, at the time.
Could be.
There was one by Phil Knight and one that was like not by him, or kind of
Shoe Dog is the one I remember.
Yeah, I remember that. I can't remember the other one.
Yeah. But anyways, very cool.
Anyway, it'd be fun to get those. They do a lot of really cool design stuff. Even today, I was hanging out with a friend a little bit earlier, and he has a really fresh Onitsuka design on his shoes. So I was like, okay, cool.
All right, yeah, check that out.
feeling some Nostrasia.
We'll have to pick some up when we're in
energy.
Japan.
Yeah. And I think these were from Japan. He actually, went to the showroom there.
Sweet.
So, So what's your? You've been traveling. You're back. Are you kind of here, more situated permanently these days, or?
Yeah. No. I mean, I, everything always is in flux. But for now, yeah. I mean, I had a fantastic summer. I took 2 trips. One, originally, actually, I was visiting with one of my portcos, had an offsite in Barcelona, which was super fun. So I went for 2 days, and then my girlfriend and I stayed in Europe for 2 weeks. And I have to say, I got Mediterranean pilled.
Oh yeah,
yeah, man, dude. It was like you always read this on Twitter, like, oh, you go to Europe and you just feel so much better. And I was like, I don't know, that seems kind of like I don't know if that's true or not. But I will say I'm somewhat of an interesting case today because I walk so much here in America. Like I walk a lot, and so I'm certainly not walking more, or if I am, not much more when I'm in Europe. And so when we were there, we ate obviously a lot of fresh. The vegetables tasted super crisp. The olive oil was incredible. We were drinking more wine than normal. And I have to say, man, like 0 hangovers ever from wine. Like just my energy levels were off the charts. Like something is going on food wise over there that I don't know. I got Euro pill.
So like where else were you? So you went to Barcelona, and then where else?
And then we traveled, for a couple weeks, or not a couple weeks, for 2 weeks. We went for a couple of days just on the Mediterranean in Spain and France. And so we were just kind of vagabonding. Like it was super fun. It was the first time I've been, vagabonding without a plan since COVID. And so, yeah, we went to Figueres, Cadaqués, Coulier in France, and then up through Paris, and then flew out of London. But it was great because we just kind of like, all right, let's go here, let's
Yeah.
go there.
And it was all just on each day you would wake up and decide what to do next.
Yeah, or maybe decide the day before. But yeah, it was super
I like
fun.
that style of travel.
It's my dream, man. Like I realize how much I miss that kind of spontaneity, and yeah, I need to find a way to like integrate that more. But
Yeah.
it was super fun. And then when I came back, obviously we had the AI for All hackathon, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Shout out to Cody Lowe at Fetty, who did a lot of work, putting that together, and it was really awesome. We
Yeah.
had some cool projects.
It was great. I got to drop in and at least say hi.
Oh yeah, that's
right.
right. Yeah, I forgot we overlapped for like
it was
a day.
it was a short visit, but we had a stomach issue in the family.
Yeah, no worries. I've been there many times. But so anyway, so that was great. And then I went to Mexico for 2 weeks.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and that was
Back with the old tribe where you're hanging.
back when two of my old tribes. One, my buddy Pablo and I, we haven't made music together since.
Not the Pablo.
Well, not that Pablo, different Pablo.
Another the Pablo.
Not Pablo F7Z. This is Pavlov, as he goes by. It's his producer name. But yeah, this is one of my best friends, and we haven't made music together since COVID. And so we put down a couple of tracks. We just, started everything from scratch together, and that was super fun. He's working on mixing those. At some point, I'll drop those. And then, two of my other best friends, we went into Veracruz in the mountains, and just got a chance to kind of galaxy brain a little bit, which I always love. And anyways, it was a fantastic summer.
That's cool. And in speaking of music, did we talk about, or did you see the spoof that we dropped?
Oh my God, yes.
Did we talk about that already?
If you guys haven't watched it, this man made one of the most hilarious videos with I don't even know how to describe it, like an Elon Musk caricature. I don't know, like. Let's just put it this way. DK is a man of many talents. An excellent song. We should link to it. I don't know, in the YouTube notes or whatever, but it was
fun.
well done.
It was kind of a spoof on Elon Musk and Twitter and kind of Hamilton, music and track. So
yeah, but this man's talented. This man's
good.
talented.
That was fun.
Writing and singing,
That's fun. So great. Well, we've got a bunch of notes. I was thinking that it would be fun. I almost feel like I'm a blank canvas again. Like I want to hear. I know you curated most of the notes, I think, for today. So I'd love to hear kind of what you're learning and kind of what you're thinking about, what's top of mind for you. And one thing I was going to mention, actually related to the video or kind of the music stuff, is Stemster reminded me. Have you played with store.app?
You told me about it, and I looked at it a couple weeks ago, but I haven't played with it recently.
Okay. I've got one of my to-dos is to schedule some time with the guy who's working on that because he's in San Francisco.
Amazing.
And we were talking about getting together when I'm here, but my understanding is it's kind of a, PWA app store, so kind of a non-app store app store. And I noticed when I just opened it up, it's kind of it's not a Nostr related thing. It's just, a PWA thing. But I noticed Stemster on his curated list of like things that you should, give a try, for kind of PWA centric apps. So
I love it. And is he already kind of Nostr pilled a little bit, or?
I believe he's. We were DMing about this. I'm trying to recall exactly what. I don't want to misrepresent what he said, but I think he said he's aware of it, but has not dug in, and that was one of the topics that we were going to cover. And then I sort of was talking broadly about how he thinks about payments in this thing and his views on Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency stuff. And I think he's pretty open and doesn't have a lot of specific views on what should be what. So I think there's opportunity to sort of share our side of the world and how we see things.
That's great.
Which would be good. And then, so that's one. I don't even know if I had on the list, but I wanted to mention it because it kind of...
it's a great idea.
Bunch of sparks connected.
And maybe just pause it for 1 second because I've noticed, you shared that on Twitter maybe a month or so ago. And I noticed a lot of more mainstream folks, or mainstream, i.e. not Nostr folks, getting really excited about PWAs. I noticed a couple of tweets like what's happening there is like PWA, is that having like a real moment? Like, are people...
Do you know the friend.tech thing?
No.
Oh, that's, I think, what's happening. And so have you ever heard of Friends for Sale or Stolen?
Definitely not.
Okay. There's like this kind of idea that I'll call it like stock market for people.
Okay.
And it's kind of a game idea.
Okay.
It was first created as a Facebook app like in 2007. So when Facebook first launched the platform, it had a very relatively permissive API.
Yeah.
You could pull all
like
kinds
everything.
of friend relationships and really try to understand who's connected to who. And so these guys built an app called Friends for Sale, and it was like I could buy Macs for, like virtual currency.
Bit of a weird name, but okay.
And then friends of mine could like bid, or friends of ours could bid more to like steal you from me.
Okay.
Right. And so there's kind of this ownership front. So that thing was very popular, but also kind of crazy on Facebook. Then they did the same thing. It was called Stolen, and it was done on kind of Twitter as a mobile app, but with the Twitter graph.
Okay.
Probably 10 years ago. And that got shut down, I think, both by Twitter and by Apple. Because it's like crazy viral. Everybody wants to play with these things, right? They're like
Interesting.
it's just like such a provocative, funny idea. And then, and so friend.tech is that same concept now done as a PWA website.
Huh.
And they've chosen to use Ethereum for payments. So for that, I'm kind of like, shrug, whatever.
Yeah, whatever, yeah.
But I think the thing that's interesting is that I wouldn't by any means call it mainstream, but it's a use case that you couldn't really launch that thing in an app store.
Got it.
And so it touches on like thematically stuff that I think is exciting to think about, like what are the future of PWAs? How do you get these things adopted?
Yeah.
So it's a website that you can only use as a PWA. You can't do it until you save it to your home screen and use it. And then you have all these like stock market for people, and you use Ethereum for payment. So I haven't actually used it. I don't have any Ethereum, but lest anyone question. But I haven't used it, but I think it's interesting in that it shows a use case that doesn't work. It's sort of incompatible with app stores, which is what I think is interesting. Is find the things that are,
that you can't do on an app
store. You can't do it because, and I think adult and gambling are the obvious things that like you can't do. And this is something in kind of gaming, gambling-ish.
Right.
I'd call this kind of in the gambling category. But I think when you have those things, those are going to be if there's opportunities to give people more open tools, I think those are the categories that we'll see kind of really embrace those open tools first, just like it was on the early internet.
Yeah,
those were
always.
They're just like, there's money behind it. There's direct monetization, sort of easy to see the opportunities. And so, you see lots of innovation kind of led by that.
So for that kind of an app, and I get why you would need to do a PWA if the App Store's not going to allow it. But what graph are they using? Because they can't, this seems like, not this is the app that I would want to build or fund, but like this seems like something that could use Nostr very well, no? Using that kind of social graph.
Yeah, I haven't played with friend.tech. I don't know if, it may be that it's bootstrap off of some Discord relationships, or maybe it's using Twitter relationships, but not kind of logging in via Twitter. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I don't know. You could make the game work with no graph. It's just easier to get started if you can already see people that are relevant. But another way to do it is have no graph and start with, a few dozen people or a few hundred people, and kind of like let people see who's trending and what's popular and stuff like that. So I don't think graph is like extremely critical to the potential for it to sort of pop.
Yeah.
But it also, I think by now is kind of faded. So it's not to say this is like the most durable, amazing use of the technology. It's more like, here's an early example that needs this different approach, and it does get enough visibility, and people can kind of work their way through the challenges of it and still make it work. So
yeah. Well, look, I think Nostr and PWAs are great allies.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. If anyone's experimenting with PWAs, then it's only one pretty easy step to Nostr from there. So it's cool.
Yeah. And I know in the PWA world, so if I understand right, and I think we have it on our list, but Spring from Artur is not PWA, right? It's only Google Play Store app.
Well, at least to my understanding, because it's definitely what I want to talk with you about. Yeah. I've read a lot about it, but I haven't experienced it firsthand because I don't have Android.
Oh yeah, okay.
So I would love for it to be PWA. Artur, if you're listening, we'd love a PWA.
I've seen some of the writing he's done on it in private, and I think when I click on the things, I think it was linked through the Google Play Store. So
it was, yeah.
My understanding is it's a Google Play Store app, but it maybe has a vision or future to be more of just a web app and a PWA. But yeah, actually, so what is your understanding of Spring right now? Because I can...
Yeah, let's start there. I have read a little bit as well. from Artur. And my understanding, and again, this is kind of abstract because I haven't been able to play with it yet, but my understanding is it's the first Nostr browser, or one of the first Nostr browsers at least. And the idea is that you can plug in various micro apps into there. And so I did see some screenshots or like demos of him using it. And so you do have some of the news type functionality that you get from the Twitter clones, but then you also have like, I guess kind of like an app store. Like you can select different apps to do different things. I assume, I forget what was in there, but I assume it was, DVMs, Stemster, things like that. Is that a fair understanding? Or yeah, maybe you've played with it, so you have a better idea.
No, so I haven't been able to use the Android app yet, so I kind of am in a similar position. But we've traded a bunch of emails. I think you run some of those threads. And the stuff that, to me, it feels like it is kind of a key manager plus a bunch of the existing web apps. So by Nostr Browser, it's kind of like it's Chrome, but with your keys already in place.
Got it.
To be able to browse things that were built not as kind of native mobile apps, but as web apps. So they were kind of built to be used on the web. And then this is a browser to use them without having to sort of, messy your keys into, Chrome or whatever, your private keys. But I think that's kind of like, in a sense, to me, it feels like a little bit of a nice way to demo the idea. And I'm still trying to understand exactly what Artur has in mind, because I think he's just like thought about this a lot and has a lot of ideas, and they've already built a lot of this stuff. But the thing that grabs me as interesting here is that, I think you can, today, if you want to be in like that ecosystem, you basically have to build a full-featured web app. So you have to have something to do with the keys and then some way to view the thing. And a lot of it is, like I think I saw a highlighter on there, and I saw, actually, I think we have the list.
Yeah,
I think I have a list up somewhere here. This might be the other, you mentioned, is it Ifan who's doing the other browser-y thing?
I don't know Ifan, but I've followed his work, and he has like another, what I assume is kind of a browser as well, like a lot of different apps in there.
Yeah. And so here, I'll just pull this up. So my understanding is this is like Chess, Coracle, Habla, Highlighter, Iris.2, Nostr.band, Nostr.build. And these are each, built as independent web apps. And then this is like a way to browse the fully built full stack web apps. And the thing that I think is the most interesting thing about this kind of space is that you can take the app ideas and build them into, build micro apps instead of apps. And so instead of building a full end-to-end experience, maybe somebody could just build like a really great DM experience that can be plugged into everything else. Somebody else could build like a really great, feed consumption experience, and then that can just sort of be used by everybody who wants to build a different kind of feed consumption.
Got it.
And we're not at that stage yet, and I think to get there, we would need somebody to like make a proposal, like a concrete proposal to say, here's sort of the spec, here's like a crappy prototype version of a DM app, and now everybody wants to go build something crazy and awesome, build the very best DM app that could be there. And if you build it in this, it's like a new layer of abstraction. And so it should be that these layers allow for things to be like more like kind of atomic in a way, like you have smaller atoms that you can play with, which should mean that you don't have to do, I'm going to commit to building a full end-to-end, a Twitter clone or a full-featured everything. But you can say, I want to do a hack project on the weekend and just replace this core functionality with a slightly better one.
Got it. And I imagine that means, and I think my understanding was Artur was mentioning you could just write like, for example, like a weird script, or even like if one day I think he was talking about doing his own like drag and drop type experience, or maybe you want to just do one very different thing where it's like, hey, I just want to customize when I like something that it gives this emoji, or like, I don't know, this amount of sats or whatever. Is that kind of your thinking? Is this going to allow for a lot more like kind of weird custom long tail of apps to be plugged into various things as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would almost think of them as like long tail of like features within apps. So if you want to do like a special custom emoji today, if you wanted to build, let's say that you wanted a custom emoji, I think, right? They're like reaction types, right? If you wanted to do it with like a special animation, you can't just do that. You have to like build a full Twitter clone in order to build the animated emoji thing that you want. And if you had these atomic units and these like kind of Legos or building blocks more kind of carefully defined or sort of componentized, then you could just like be like, okay, here's kind of the Twitter clone kind of demoware.
Yep.
And you can use the key store from the Spring browser. And then maybe your profile is done by, was it Nostr, or one of those things does something of a profile builder and designer. And then another tool is like the feed consumption, and another tool is like the composer. And then you're like, actually, I don't like the way they did the composer. I want to do my own composer where I can upload GIFs or something, or whatever, something that's not supported in the other way. And then somebody's like, actually, I want like a view. I want all of that stuff, but I want a view where I can just see all the videos. So only show me messages that contain videos, and then show me it in like a TikTok consumption experience. So I'm not gonna build a whole app. I'm only gonna build a TikTok consumption experience that plugs into this kind of infrastructure.
Super interesting. And so, I mean, okay, my mind is running with a lot of things. In some levels, this feels almost, one, like a marketplace, or it could become a marketplace, which is interesting. Two, almost like an OS level. Is that like a fair way to think about it? And then you have all these apps within apps. And then you could even imagine, like, if you, in that version we just saw, you click on DMs. Within that, then you could also have sub apps in there. Like once you click on the DM app in there, it's like, hey, like here are the various emoji apps, here are the various whatever. And each of those could have like, hey, pay 100 Satoshis to unlock this or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Fascinating. Now, what about the world where, depending on how good LLMs get really quickly with coding and stuff, what do you think about the world where you're like, actually, I want this experience you just described with TikTok, and I'm just going to speak it. I'm just going to be like, hey, I want a red app that gives me a TikTok-like consumer experience, and I only want to see videos of Pedro Salchicha weenie dogs, and that's it.
Yeah, that's 100% the future. And I don't know if we're there in like 3 weeks or 10 years. Like it's somewhere in between there.
Very strict window. Thanks, Dickett.
I'm like going to stick a flag in the ground, and I've got the kind of 3 weeks to 10 year gap. So you can take the over under or whatever.
Good horizon. I'll probably take the over on 3 weeks, but then hell, I don't know.
No, I've got 3 weeks to 10 years.
Oh,
you've got either, over 10 years or under 3 weeks.
Oh, perfect.
But I guess what I'm saying is these things are going to happen where you can just speak. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about the AI stuff is how it's going to enable every human on the planet to have custom software designed to exactly their needs.
Yeah, it's super cool.
It's like you think about the history of like commercial software and then like hobbyist stuff and then open source. And I think the LLM code gen thing in various flavors of it are going to enable, if you look, there's 8 billion people in the world, and if you look at it, roughly 0%, like what is it, 1%, 2%, it's like rounds to zero, how many people actually can write software to serve those 8 billion people.
Super small, like 100 million or something, probably. At
most. If that,
Yeah.
And, for quality software,
probably like 8 million.
Yeah. So we're talking tiny numbers of people who write the software that powers all 8 billion people's lives.
That's crazy.
And, you think about just like little features, like, I don't know if anybody in the Nostr world has built, like, there's a lot of people who speak languages that read right to left. And then there's different affordances and how you'd want to show those kinds of things in a feed and how you might want to have, maybe the composer works very differently in those languages. There's probably, I don't know, there's probably 1 billion people who read those kinds of languages. Like, I think there's Arabic or Hebrew or, some of those, I think probably Hebrew, not Arabic, but I think Hebrew reads right to left. And so nobody's probably built that yet.
Yeah.
Or maybe they haven't, I've just not heard of it. But like, that's still a big segment. There's software that, like, I bet there's software that you or your friends or your somebody in your family who doesn't write any software would have a very specific need that's specific to them. And LLMs are going to unlock the ability for them to just speak their desires.
So cool.
And get it into code and software that's deployed and usable by them.
I mean, this is magic.
Yeah.
Literally, you're like speaking a spell into existence and like, boom, you've got software. Like that's, do you think in that world then is natural language going to be the most powerful programming language? I mean, I'm assuming there will always be like super artisans that can go in there just like today, there's still people that go down and do whatever, C++ or Rust or whatever, but there's far fewer of those than there are of JavaScript. There's going to be far fewer of those than there are probably the LLM speakers. Yeah. Do you think that's a good way to think about it? Or
yeah, sure. And I think like one of the things that's tough about writing software is even like specifying what you want it to do in various edge cases and various future things that are not explored. So English language is not a very specific way to express ideas, and Rust is a much, much more specific way to express ideas, right?
Right.
So I don't know how you bridge that. It's got to be bridged at some point. But like today, the way it gets bridged is like you talk to somebody who knows how to write the software, and then when you make some vague ask, they ask you follow-up questions to make your ask more specific. Well, how are you going to handle the date in the date field there, and what happens when this thing overruns to that thing? You know, sort of talk you through the corner cases, the edge cases that they see, because they actually know how to think about specifying it in a very specific language.
Totally.
So that's part of the LLM challenge, is how do you explore the space and do the follow-up questions to ask a non-technical person what the edge cases are on the software they're sort of asking to be written.
Totally. But you can, I mean, obviously very quickly imagine the LLMs get good enough where you just keep doing iterative cycles with them. They say, hey, do you like, kind of like when you go to the, what do you call it? The eye doctor. There's a real name for it, but yeah, optometrist or whatever. Yeah. And they're just like, is this one better or this one? This one, this one. And I could just see an LM being like this or this or this. And you just keep getting more and more. And of course, if you ever really want to go down to the base level code, maybe there'll be marketplaces, like I kind of like the direction like that Replit is heading with this, where it's like you have the LLM, more people learn to code. Some will just speak it. Some will do some coding, some speaking it. You've then got bounties that you can place out there for people to help you either debug your code or improve it. I don't know. I think that kind of generic direction of more people speaking software into existence, but also having like a robust marketplace for the actual developers to be brought in when you need to. Yeah. That seems at least like medium term what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I agree. And I think it's almost like it's going to be a new layer of abstraction where like the real craftsman, artisan developers, like if you know what you're doing, you can be even more effective at what you're trying to accomplish. It's easier to. I was talking to a friend and he's kind of like, really, are people gonna be just like, speaking code stuff? It's like, I sort of see it as like how many people who work, I don't pick your favorite company. What's your favorite company? It's your favorite software company? I don't know. Replit. Let's just take Replit.
Okay.
How many people at Replit are like, etching PN junctions to
like
the
super
semiconductor
boring stuff.
No, it's
or like super low level, almost.
It's so low level that nobody's doing it.
Yeah,
like that. It's a solved problem.
Right.
Outsource it to Intel or ARM or somebody. But then like who's writing the ones and zeros?
Yeah,
someone same. But no, it's like it's a different layer of abstraction. It's solid, right? So and then today we're like, well, who's writing the Rust code?
Yeah.
Well, somebody is actually, right? But you can. It doesn't mean that nobody should or can. But it's like if you really want an artisan or a craftsman in there writing Rust code, you probably are like really at the bleeding edge of needs. Right. But if you're like, oh, I need a thing to help me schedule my calendar with my family better, and it kind of needs to do this, and like if somebody calls or texts that, then just respond this way. You can kind of just describe that.
Totally.
It's not like super sophisticated engineering required. I mean, today it's still, you have to gather requirements and figure out exactly what to build. So it's not like it's done today, but it's like that kind of thing should be doable through these. And then the real artisans and craftsmen should be able to do, kind of more advanced, like just, the frontier of this, right? Instead of just sort of like the rest of it should become commodity and available to everybody basically for free.
I love it. And to your point, like you just keep getting higher and higher abstracted up the stack. More people can do more interesting things and experiment faster, get like prototypes out there the higher you are up the stack.
Yep. And so we were talking about Spring. Right?
Oh yeah,
and
Spring, Archer, yeah.
So you were talking about how like, do people just speak these ideas into existence? And I think like, yes, probably in the long term, or at least, 3 weeks, it'll be at least 3 weeks from now is my bet. But I think there's like, there's plenty of time in between where there's going to be, like experts, sophisticated software engineers writing these things.
Yep.
And I would suspect that, this, a special emoji animation thing should be listed as like a component that everybody else can then pull from.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
And I think we don't have an ecosystem for that because we don't have anybody like orchestrating how to do this. So I pointed out that I think the best example we have, and I haven't programmed for Android before, but I'm familiar with this. Do you know this architectural thing called Intents? Or no. I think you were on this thread. So unlike, we're both iPhone people, right? So unlike the iPhone, like the iPhone, if you want to send me a message, I have to receive it in iMessage. You have to receive the response in iMessage, right?
Right.
In Android, they have a thing called an intent. And an intent is like I can define, hey, I want some other app to be my handler for incoming messages.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I can say, instead of the default messaging app, I want it to be handled by app X, which knows, it has written to the same kind of spec and handles the messaging intent. Well, I think there's like the same kind of concept within Nostr should be able to exist, which is like, hey, this is going to be my DM handler.
Right.
And like, and I think the way to instigate this, you have to write like at least a demoware prototype version of the DM handler, just to show people, oh, here's an end-to-end functioning thing, and it has the DMs and it has all the pieces. But then I think somebody will see the kind of intentionally or kind of purposely prototypey demoware version. They'll be like, you know what, I can actually do like a great version of this, or I've been working on this. Like Hodlbot has done a lot of work on messaging, right? I think that's one of the things he's really gotten deep on. So maybe he sees it and he comes along and he's like, actually, okay, the demoware version of DMs are just no good. I've actually spent time making this work really well, and so I'm going to plug it in. Or maybe some of the simplex ideas make their way in, or there's all kinds of ways to innovate. But instead of everybody starting a new Twitter clone,
right,
I would love to see this future where everybody, we need some orchestration or some sort of coordination among the people who are interested in this ecosystem to help get us like first the prototype of an end-to-end experience, but designed with a kind of intent style architecture, like a pluggable architecture.
More modular. You can just,
modular, yeah. And then you've got, I think that's, at least when I say or hear micro apps, that's what I have in mind. I don't know if that's what other people have in mind.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess, I had maybe had some trouble visualizing that, but now seeing a little bit like just like the example of like, hey, I can plug and play a DM app. I can plug and play a different Twitter app. I can plug and play a different, music app or whatever. I think that's pretty cool to me. I think then, as we've talked about many times in the show, the big interesting question becomes curation and discovery.
Yep.
Okay, so there's an infinite long tail of like weird DM apps out there. How do I decide what's interesting?
Yeah.
And this gets to a lot of what Archer was working with Nostr.band and some of the stuff that we've talked about with kind of the Satoshi signal rank or the market rank, which is in an infinite world of like weird micro apps. How do I find that social signal? This is what my friends are using and what's compatible with them versus not.
Yep.
And so I think that, that again, search and discovery is still the big opportunity.
And I think that's what Archer's doing with, is it, I'm going to misrepresent it. Is it nostrband.link or nostrlink or?
Oh, the app manager. It's like, something like that.
Yeah. I think that's where that goes or what he has in mind, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to misrepresent or speak for Artur.
Artur, if you're listening, we're wrong. Tell us.
Yeah. Artur, tell us what these tools are actually called and what you have in mind for them, because we're kind of just like riffing. But I think there's something in the nostrband.link that is like an app store for like a redirect or kind of a pointer to the sets of apps that you might want to use. And so I could imagine, using this kind of prototypey app and then, being like, oh, here's the default DM thing, but now I want to just find out, hey, which of the people that I'm following,
right,
like who's using which DM apps, and probably like whatever one Max has chosen is probably a reasonable one for me to do to get off the default, the demo, right? And probably you found it because you were talking to Pablo or somebody else. So I think there's like a lot of social signal that we can use to help curate which apps we might want to use.
Totally.
And so you can start with the default experience, but then you easily like choose whatever you want. But you can see like a list of which DM micro app are the people that I am following using, and like where's there a lot of social signal there. And I think you could almost it is like an app store in a way, but it's not an app store like, hey, download an app and log into a new thing. It's just like it's a totally different layer of abstraction. It's like the sense that like the browser is the OS for the web.
Exactly
It's not competing with Windows and Mac OS.
It's just a new level of abstraction.
I think that's what micro apps are or can be in my mind.
Yeah, I love that. And agreed. I mean, and it could also be like, you could be very, very specific, right? Like say you're left-handed. You could say, okay, just show me the left-handed people in Nostr.
Yeah.
Or say you live in Egypt or whatever, just show me these users and like, okay, who do I respect and find there?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's going to be really cool. Or exactly, you could also have like, show me the app that I like now. Great. You know, maybe there's a marketplace for that. I pay whatever, 1,000 sats to unlock it. Oh, by the way, you know, if I want to customize it, I have the options to use an LLM app that does it for me, or there's a marketplace of devs I can click, customize, tell them exactly what I want. Yeah, I think the general theme here is just there's going to be a lot more customized apps for you, whoever you are.
Yeah.
Which is badass.
That's an exciting future. But I think to get there, we need to sort of galvanize momentum around like these orchestration layers and what's the definition.
So what do you think is the first step? Because I know it looks like Archer's playing with this, Ethan is playing with this. Like I think this helped me with what Ethan was showing, and hopefully I'll be able to play with Archers as a PWA soon. What do you think is the concrete next step? Like, do these guys, they're already kind of bringing in other people's apps there. Do they need to go out there and build their own? Do they need to recruit people to build different apps so you can see the difference when you plug and play? What do you think is the next step for Spring?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is just, Archer's really thought about this. I've been thinking about it, but he's actually building it. So, I'd want to hear from him what his thoughts are.
Of course, yeah.
But I get the sense that, like somebody, maybe Archer, somebody would need to build an end-to-end app with the prototype level of functionality and maybe write out a hypothesis or proposal for what the interface is.
Yeah.
Like how should the interface, like at what layer of abstraction should these interfaces live?
Right.
Right. So you kind of, maybe that's the starting point, is you write up a long form piece on like, I'm proposing, a micro app architecture that looks like that. And I don't know, maybe somebody's done this already. So I might just be.
If you have, tell us.
Yeah, if you have, we want to hear about it. But like, here's what a micro app architecture should look like. Here's kind of the layer of abstraction. Here's how parameters should be passed. And here's how discovery, or here's how sort of installation, or like, here's sort of what a manifest of the set of micro apps that a given, app is composed of. And I think somebody should just like write up a long form thing, probably no code, just write up a long form thing about here's my proposal for what it should be. And then at least people can gather around that and be like, I don't like that version of it, or let's move it up, or let's move it down, and kind of begin the discussion. Because I think until you have some social consensus around kind of what's the right layer of abstraction to build these things, it's going to be hard to really get started. And I don't think you can do, like bounties or other kinds of, in a sense, those are just like incentive motivations. I think what you really need to do is sort of get a bunch of people collaborating and agreeing to, and, debating and discussing what layer of abstraction would make sense, and what are the problems if we go too low, what are the problems if we go too high.
And my guess is we'll see different people try different levels, and that's cool too. Like, I mean, at some point, obviously getting some more consensus to build some momentum is good. But like, I think to me, part of the magic moment will be kind of like in the early days of Nostr, there were two magic moments: the zap, obviously, and the other magic moment for me was I created, my private keys in Damus, and then uploaded it to Albi, and I was able to log into another site. When I showed that to people, they just mind blown. My guess is with something like this, it's going to blow people's minds when you can just be like, actually, I'm going to trade out this whatever instant messaging app, and like, here's 20 others. Oh, here's the one that like whatever Pablo likes. Boom, plug that in.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
So you had mentioned paying sats for things, and it kind of reminded me of a slightly different topic, or maybe it's too far afield, but I know that, I mean, there's this big question that keeps coming up, and when I sort of explain Nostr to people, they're like, well, how do you pay for all these relays to operate? And I don't, I kind of, today my answer is, it's hobbyists, it's out of the goodness of their heart, it's ideologically want this thing to succeed. So most people are kind of holding, sort of suspending disbelief or kind of, subsidizing the cost of, say, running a relay. And I know there was like a bunch of experiments around paid relays. Yeah. And I thought, did Canary shut down?
I think so, yeah.
Was it the paid relay or the free relay?
I think it was the paid one.
And do you know, I heard people asking like, oh, what happened? Like, was it not effective, or the money didn't cover it? Or do you know what the state of the world is with respect to like paid relays and like what the postmortem is on Kamari's relay or what?
Not really. I mean, I remember his note, I believe, so I also don't want to misrepresent it. But yeah, I think the general gist was like it was costing him, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how much it was. I imagine at least several $100s.
Right.
And so probably just wasn't worth the cost and frankly the time to run it would be my guess. But I mean, a lot of the other paid relays are still thriving, or at least it looks that way. Like the Domus relay appears to still be going. I don't know if that's paid or not, actually. I don't remember. I know the thing that I was very interested in was Ellen Bits released some software maybe 3 months ago or so, where you could not just do the one-time payment, but also do like pay per byte, which I thought was super cool. And so I have no idea.
Is that pay per byte of storage?
I believe it was to write. Yes. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they had it customized so you could do reorg.
Because there's bandwidth, CPU, and storage are kind of, I don't know which one's the...
I think it was storage, but yeah. If someone's listening, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But my, I guess, desire would be to see someone try that. And I don't know if anyone has yet. I haven't plugged in any new relays since whatever, my first couple months in Nostr.
Right.
And so almost all the ones I'm using was just like a one-time payment.
Right. I've kind of added things and played with it a little bit of configuration, but I don't feel like I yet have like why I should try something new or which ones I should be trying next. Like I've heard different sides of this. Like I think the discussion I had with Hodelbod, we were talking about using, thinking about relays as almost like a magazine or like a gathering point for people of a common interest.
Pablo was talking about a very similar vision for that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I think there's some kind of social consensus that that maybe like a topic-based relay is kind of the way to go. But I don't know how to like discover them and how much should they show up in the UI. Like do end users want to think about, I'm going to visit the Nostrika relay to catch all the latest information about like the Nostrika, event? It's
a good question. I mean, I think right now, obviously it's just easier if you have most of the data sort of aggregated in a small handful of relays. Obviously that's super centralized. Obviously there's like concerns around that. I think just thinking from the naive user perspective, if I were to like add a new relay, exactly, I would need some reason to do that. And so one thing would be if there were, posters that I wanted to read, like exclusive content. Like you could imagine as one example, if a celebrity comes onto Nostr at some point, and they're like, actually, I'm just posting to my relay. Now, eventually that can get spread along, but if you want to get, there's some, you want first access to it, or there's some custom reason you want that there,
right.
Like, you have to be on my relay. Otherwise, no bueno.
Right.
And so my guess is that you're going to need some kind of exclusive content or some hook to get people tied in there. And I also think that if I'm a content creator, I could see reasons why I would want to host my own data there too.
Yep. Yeah, it makes sense. I think there's like a purpose that we could identify, but it hasn't yet bubbled through the ecosystem. Either the creators haven't shown up yet or the software doesn't support it yet.
Yeah.
And the UI, I think, doesn't typically showcase it. I think there is it Coracle maybe? Or one of the things actually does show an indication of which relay this note came from.
Oh, yeah. Was that Coracle or it might have been Snort or Iris?
Yep. I'm having a tough time recalling.
Yeah.
It's been a little bit.
It's been a little bit for me too.
But yeah.
But one other kind of related topic to what we were talking about before that I wanted to make sure we touch on. Yep. We've been texting a little bit about, I think someone had asked you, hey, what are you most excited about Nostr these days? And you talked a lot about the browser stuff, which I think is very cool. To me, I have to say, I am super excited about this DVM stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk data vending machine.
Let's talk data vending machine, man. So it's first of all, it's hard to keep track because Pablo obviously is coding up a storm every day. But I love this concept. And at first I wasn't sure, if the name was the right name, but now I think it's kind of amusing because you had the EVM and now there's DVM and it's kind of interesting. But the concept for anyone that hasn't played with this is very simple. The way Pablo explains it is you put data in, pay some sats or pay some money, get new data out. And that's basically just a way of saying you're just paying for computation. Mm-hmm. And that becomes interesting because then you can do any kind of computation. And which is in a way the whole idea of the world computer, which is why I think DVM is an interesting play on EVM and kind of funny. Now, what's interesting to that is kind of to your point with all the different apps and micro apps, you can have multiple different DVMs that are chainable. And I think that's a really powerful primitive. You can basically take a job, break it down into many, many different subtasks and have each of those completed by the same or a different person or a different machine. And so where I've been getting really excited about this, and I think the interfaces are still really nascent, but is, I've been really focused on the AI stuff. And so this summer we had this hackathon, and, the kind of thesis of the hackathon AI for All was this idea of like, what can be done at the edge, something we've talked a lot about, by kind of just normal people or, consumer grade or, mid-tier enterprise grade hardware. And so what's really cool is in the AI for All hackathon, there were a bunch of different projects, but there were a couple of people who initially were using the L402 thing from Lighting Labs, where you pay an invoice, get something done. Then they saw the DVM idea. And I don't know, I think those are slightly different, but they ended up using the DVM construct, which I think could actually work with the L402, but the DVM construct to basically say, hey, we can have lots of different, basically a marketplace for each sub job. And so the project that won the AI for All hackathon was cool because, I forget the exact details, but you could basically say, I want X thing done, like create me a poster or, a marketing ad. And I want it to have, a background of the beach, and I want it to have, Heineken beer can or whatever it is on there. And like, potentially, I don't know if they had this on there, but you could have easily plugged this in, like marketing text that's written, to go after this audience. And it was so cool because then it, like, the first, I guess, sort of like AI component broke it up into 5 constituent components, sort of like the baby AGI stuff or some of those other guys out there. So you break it into components. Each of those components then is its own job, and that's farmed out as a DVM, which now has a NIP behind it. So it's a standard. And so that's farmed out to the Nostr network. And those jobs can either be done in parallel or sequentially, right? So you can have that, sort of tagged. And what's cool is then they showed they had a market. I don't know if they were running them all themselves for this. I think so. But they had this marketplace of like, okay, this one, image generation model that, again, it's probably just run on some dude's GPU, is going to be able to do this job to create the background. And this image generation model is going to create the beer can. And this, LLM is going to create the text for there. And each of those was different, and they were all chained together. And it was just really, to me, it was just like a powerful aha moment where it's like, man, if you think about it, you could subdivide almost any job into a lot of mini tasks. And then, some of those jobs, increasingly more and more of those jobs will be done by new AI models. And you could plug in and say, like, maybe I really do need, for this really sophisticated copywriting, I need to call OpenAI's API because it's just the best in the world. Cool. But maybe there's like a separate version of the ad where I need it to say something that Sam Altman doesn't think is kosher. And like, so I need to use someone, running Llama or whatever. I just want to do the cheaper thing because it doesn't need to be perfect. And, I could have kind of your version. I could have 20 different versions of the ad or 20 different versions of the poster that I'm creating, all done instantly or, really quickly by many different people. And you could also have humans farmed in there too, which is kind of cool. Like you could say, okay, I need whatever, all this done by the AIs, the first poster and copyright. But then you could also have a human come in and review it and say, do some, reinforcement learning. Actually, no, this is good. This is bad. Or like edit it to make sure it's perfect, crystal clear. And they could also get paid sats. And so when you just start to see the potential for this, it's just mind blowing because, again, almost anything can be subdivided. Software, marketing, whatever, into lots of constituent parts. And when you can chain together an open free market of AIs competing for those, like, that's like some really powerful stuff.
Yeah. I'm I'd say believer and fan of that kind of vision that you're laying out. I do wonder what is a good initial path to get there.
Agreed.
Because, like, let's say the competitor to that idea is the single source AI providers who today are actually subsidizing a lot of the training and inference.
Totally.
And so if you're paying on a very transactional basis and you're not getting the value of the subsidies that the kind of, maybe if you want to call it overinvestment that some people may be making, we don't know yet, but
TBD.
But people may be overinvesting to some extent to try to win market share or to try to be the first, ultimately like a branding and kind of user kind of acquisition thing. But if people are competing in that way, then that's the competition for like the things that are transacting, it's very transactional value in that marketplace, but the market is not yet efficient enough to sort of navigate demand toward that kind of very efficient vision. So I wonder, it's not to say that it's too early. It may actually be the right time, but I feel like if it's the right time, then we should try to figure out what is the type of use case that, like, can we think of frameworks or structures for what kinds of use cases may be the first to really get advantage from this.
Totally. Well, so I have some thoughts around that. I would love to get yours as well. So I think obviously some of the first use cases are just going to be hobbyists, just like with Lightning, in the early days or whatever. And so I was really excited to see, I don't know if you checked out the new release from Current. I was pretty impressed. I played with it this morning.
I haven't seen it.
They have a new tab in there. Like those guys have been shipping, like real talk. And so shout out to the Current team, like well done. They already have the ability to generate your, I guess, profile picture or an image in the app. And in the background, today it's just using their own image generation model, but they're using DVMs so that you could easily have a marketplace for that.
Oh, cool.
And so if you look, Pablo has Vindata IO out there, which is, it's complicated. It's got a lot on there. But if you go to his
Vindata, right? V-I-N?
V-E-N, like Vin, like vendor.
Oh, okay.
data.io.
Okay.
And so on Vindata, they have, if you go to Vindata/jobs, you can see all of the recent jobs that were done by DVM. And cool. It's picking up steam. And a lot of that is, I think in the last day or two, it's current users that are generating their profile pictures or whatever in the app. So
cool.
A lot of it's going to be hobbyist use just to kind of get started. But like people will play with it. I play with it, right? Today it was all free. I'm sure soon you'll have to like pay a couple sats per thing. Cool. So you'll get some hobbyists using it. But I think to see kind of like mainstream adoption, I think my three hypotheses. Hypothesis number one, like we talked about, and this is obviously going to be one of them, is stuff that the centralized companies won't let you do. So if you want completely uncensored access to a model and OpenAI or Google, has trained their model differently, well, this is the only way to get that done. So, whatever groups for whatever reasons need an uncensored version of the model, that's going to be one big use case. Second big use case, I think, could be, it remains to be seen, but potentially users that have difficulty, like in emerging markets, accessing OpenAI or some of the other APIs because they don't have access to a credit card. I actually don't know how much of a real challenge that is or how many of these users exist.
Right.
But at least in theory, that's a very big market. Whatever group of people can't access Stripe, let's say.
Right.
And then the third is, and this kind of gets into a little bit of another idea I'm very excited about with GPUTopia launching recently, which was badass.
Yeah.
But there is just also a shortage of GPUs for inference right now. And so, and I imagine, yes, there's overbuild happening. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen, but there will probably be some points in the market where, you can't get everything you need done by some of these centralized providers.
Right.
I don't think that's hit yet, but you could imagine a world where there's a lot of demand to do whatever thing your startup wants to do. And just, if you can't get the GPUs for inference, perhaps this open marketplace. And so the idea behind GPUTopia, not to steal the thunder at that, is this literally just launched a day ago. Click a button, offer your GPU when you're not using it, get paid in sats. And so you could imagine you have kind of two marketplaces, a marketplace for GPUs. They already had, I think, about 100 users that are doing this and testing it. And one day, I think this is going to go really fast.
Yeah.
And then you could have potentially a marketplace for AI agents on top of that. And so maybe there is this long tail that's only available on the crowdsourced GPUs.
Right. I see. Yeah, that makes sense. My understanding is that even getting the GPU, kind of the hardware that you want today, is often nearly impossible. You're not getting your order fulfilled to the same extent that you'd hope or demand.
Right.
So it seems like there's something around kind of a mismatch in kind of supply and demand on just the hardware side. So if somebody has access to the hardware, that does seem like a credible type of thing that you could say, I'm going to train for a little bit on this and then switch it out. So maybe do you remember the old architecture of programming was that you kind of would timeshare?
Oh yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, not that I was around then, but
yeah. But that same idea maybe will make sense for GPUs, and it's like a global timeshare of GPUs.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I made a bit of a tongue-in-cheek spicy tweet this morning. Got a little bit of traction where I was basically my thesis at HiveMind, one of my theses is to pick quote unquote crypto projects that are interesting, strip out the unnecessary token, rebuild it with Lightning payments and Nostr. And so three of the big markets that I've been excited about for a long time, one is distributed compute. And so we've seen stuff like Golem back in 2017, and now Jensen, which just raised a big Series A. And then you've got distributed markets for bandwidth and storage, which, you've got Filecoin, all that stuff, Helium. I basically just think, and by the way, if anyone's building this stuff, I really want to invest in companies using Lightning payments for markets for distributed bandwidth storage and compute. But this first one for compute just makes so much sense to me because, again, I know for a fact startups are like the differentiating factor for a lot of investors is, can we give you GPU access, right?
Yeah.
And so that may not be the case forever, but there is a moment in time, at least now, where like that is a big deal. And so, people have given me different estimates. Maybe you have an idea of like how much latent GPU access is out there. I don't think anyone actually knows.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows. But my sense is that things are more, that they're very demand constrained.
Yeah.
Supply constrained. So there's too much demand. So I would guess like there's not a lot of GPUs just lying fallow, if that's what you mean.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think we'll find out, right? So just to, to play the kind of the other side of that, like there's a lot of gaming computers out there. I'm not saying those are like, they're certainly not the top of the line cards or whatever, but potentially could do some inference work.
My understanding is the gaming stuff and the AI stuff is like pretty different from the hardware perspective.
It could be. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on this. Definitely for training. For inference, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think some inference could be done on that. I think two other big factors, though. One is there's probably, I'm guessing on this, and we'll find out. I'm hearing a little bit through the grapevine that we have some early data points. The answer is yes. There's like a lot of like Ethereum miners out there. I don't know if you know, like CoreWeave, they were pure Ethereum miner. They, pivoted 18 months or whatever ago to go all in on compute for AI training and inference. And now, they've received investment from NVIDIA. They're like one of like...
Didn't they do... What was the number... Somehow the number...
It's crazy.
Is it 23 billion or 2.3 billion? They have some...
I doubt 23. I don't know the number, but
it's too big, but
it's huge.
Yeah, but something where they were going to like... I think they were going to acquire these chips and then they were going to like take a loan and lever against it. I didn't follow
what could go wrong with with that fractionalizing it. I don't know the numbers, but I know it's wild. And I know now they're like after the big, the big clouds of Google and Amazon and Microsoft, they're like right up there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my larger point is that I do think there's probably a lot of like ex Ethereum miners or early Bitcoin miners. And I'm hearing through the grapevine that this is already starting to happen that have capacity and are now kind of interested in this. My guess is we'll see, but I think it's going to kind of mimic the early days of mining as well. Like there will probably be some like, I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying it's a possibility of what could happen. Like, hey, like maybe a university's computers just some like enterprising student finds a way to offer access to that for training and inference. Right. I think when you let the market go, you're going to be surprised how much is out there. So we'll see, but I think that idea is super interesting. And when you have that specialized, open cloud, maybe, on those, you're eventually that kind of shifts into also a marketplace for the open source edge agents as well.
Yeah. And I think that speaking of open source and edge, I think those are interesting other factors. We don't really know if the kinds of training and inference people want to do long-term has to be that expensive.
Totally.
It may get really cheap really fast, which is exciting, right? Push it all out to the edges, run them on your phones, run them on your laptops.
I love it, dude. And in fact, there was, we talked about a couple of episodes ago, you had mentioned that that tweet from that guy, Chris Pike, which I thought was interesting. I don't know him, but I thought, he was really big on this idea of kind of like, using web GPU to make it easier to access GPUs for inference at the edge. And I read a little bit more of what he was writing about. And he had the interesting point where he was like, look, if you're very bullish on Apple, which I don't see them going anywhere, and it seems like they have pretty strong connections with TSMC, then, they've made investments in it. Look, I'm not an expert on this, but apparently from what I understand, their M chips, and the sort of neural circuitry that they have associated with that, pretty good for at least for inference. And so I think the argument he was making that I resonated with, at least, from an outsider's point of view, is they're making some multiple of chips that NVIDIA is making. If NVIDIA was doing 30 mil, they're doing 150 mil or 200 mil or whatever the number was. It was more, right? Because they have all of the phones, they have all of the computers, all of the iPads. And so if there is a world where those chips get good enough to do a lot of this inference, obviously not all of it, but let's say a good chunk of it at the edge, well, all of a sudden I started thinking, well, what if everyone with an M1 chip or an M2 or soon an M3 chip can just click a button, farm it out to the cloud when you're not using it? That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So maybe, these are all interesting ideas that could be, I guess, that marketplace for compute idea. So is what function or layer does GPUTopia serve today? Is it's the market maker or they have their own
so to
hardware?
Be clear, they launched yesterday.
Okay.
So it's GPUTopia.ai, like all of that's TBD. Today, I think they're coordinating it. So they are kind of like the market. They're matching everyone right now, I think.
Okay.
And I think
And
eventually
matching the GPU owners
with the people
demand.
that want to run models. Yeah.
And are they using, how do they do payments today?
Lightning. And so
Okay,
you just
cool.
basically download Alby, get paid out.
Nice.
And eventually they're going to offer, WebLN, so, Alby or anything else you want to do, or your own wallet, whatever, probably a Lightning address.
Right.
But this was just kind of like see demand, like, 100 users in a day. That's a start.
Right.
And I think eventually the plan is for them to steer towards Nostr.
Uh-huh.
Now, in that world, I don't know exactly where the business model lies, right? Like, as we talked about, this goes back to like, well, if all of the order book is done openly, you have to make money by providing other services or whatever. And, I think that's the generic question for all marketplaces on Nostr. But I think that's the direction they're headed.
Nice.
It's cool.
Yeah.
It's very sci-fi. And like, I mean,
Crazy.
when I saw that, I was just like, shit. And it's working.
Yeah. That's cool. What else? I'm trying to think, because we have a ton of notes, but what are the highlights or things that are worth kind of jamming on here?
So we talked about the GPU marketplace, DVMs, the Nostr browser. I mean, we didn't talk about this last time, but I just definitely want to give a shout out to the Stemster team.
Uh-huh.
I haven't played with that as much as I would like. My hope is when I get some stuff off my plate soon, I would like to spend a lot more time making music there. But what I love about the Stemster app is it's very Nostr native, right? So it's this whole concept. And it's something that I've been showing a lot of friends that are like, okay, I don't want to do Bitcoin stuff.
Right.
I'm not into this like weird tech nerd stuff. Great. Stemster, what I like about it is it's a very simple use case where, okay, I'm creating a song. Maybe I lay down a beat, and then I don't even think they have the payments built in yet, but you can imagine very quickly where this is going to go. Someone else then takes that and can remix it, add their own voice on top.
Yeah.
So imagine someone took your Elon Musk song, they come in, they remix it, and then very soon you could imagine you do splits on that, right? Like you have in the Value for Value podcasting, whatever. And so it's like, okay, cool. DK was the original, whatever, author of this song.
Yeah.
I'm going to come in, remix it, put on some hip hop tracks or my own drums. Cool. So now anyone that zaps me, we're going to get 50-50 split.
Yeah.
Then you could imagine very quickly, and by the way, this is Wavelake is also, Wavelake is more of a traditional music streaming platform. They've already integrated Nostr login as well. They recently, I think, have been working with Adam Curry on his new thing, Boostagram Ball, which is super dope. And Boostagram Ball is like basically, Adam Curry was the original VJ for MTV.
Right, yeah.
Now it's his new podcast where he's basically taking music that's Value for Value enabled, and anyone that zaps, he's splitting back to the artist. So he's literally DJing a podcast where the artists get paid. And so you could imagine, a world where all that happens natively on Nostr, right? Like someone lays down a track, someone lays down, a verse, someone else lays down a chorus, someone else lays down a remix on top of that. Then, the splits get split between the creators, but then the curator steps in.
Right.
And the curator says, like, cool, I'll take 20% for curating and getting this in front of my audience. And the other 80% gets split on the back end.
So this has been on my mind, and I was having a debate with a friend about these concepts. And I'll take a little bit of like the other view of how this may play out. I'm not advocating one or the other. But this came up because are you sort of a Daft Punk fan or familiar with their work?
Yeah, I'm certainly familiar. Yeah.
So have you heard of the Switched on Pop podcast?
No.
So this is like a podcast that's dedicated to basically ripping apart, it's an ethnomusicologist and a music historian or something.
Sounds fancy.
I forget exactly their backgrounds, but they basically like take a piece of music and try to tear apart all the stories and the history and how this came to be and what else was happening at that same time. Cool. So they just published a 4-part on Daft Punk. And I guess like what was, I think Homework maybe was the first album in was it early 90s?
So yeah, a long time ago.
And I think, I forget if they did four albums. There were 4 episodes. But it kind of talks about the evolution of Daft Punk from being like, I've always known them to be kind of this like robot/human thing, but I didn't realize how deeply that is the whole story of Daft Punk. And early Daft Punk was very robotic, and you can sort of follow both kind of the lyrics and the stories, and the like music production went from being very, very digital to very, very human.
Interesting.
And so the most recent was 10 years ago. They just had the 10th anniversary of Random Access Memories.
Yeah.
And that is actually a very human album compared to everything else they've done, right? They've got like
Pharrell and all that,
Yeah, and there's like a lot of, there's real human singers without vocoders and voice effects. But they kind of like, when they did that, they kind of finished. It was almost like a bookend on the end of their career because the robots have now become human.
Yeah.
And so they spent, 20 years or whatever, effectively exploring like this interesting edge between humans and AI. And that's kind of, so this is all kind of background on this discussion I was having with my friend, which is basically like Daft Punk, they were early in some of the sampling wars and what does it mean to be sampling people's stuff and how much can you borrow and what else can you do to it that makes it yours. And we really got down to like a very fundamental question about like what is like ownership, authorship, copyright, like what does this stuff mean?
Yeah.
And so like I'm a little bit of the side, I think I came out of this kind of experience and discussion, a little bit of the side like I love to create things online. I believe that artists should get paid.
Yep.
But I don't know how to manage the splits of, when I'm borrowing an idea, how much of it is my idea and how much of it is the source material. When an AI is borrowing my ideas, how much of it is my ideas versus the AI's unique input. And I think we talked a little bit about the Rick Rubin. Have you were reading that, or we talked about that at all?
I didn't read it, no.
But I think we're still only halfway through it. we read a lot of things in parallel. But he kind of talks about the creative process. The creator is kind of just like a vessel to usher an idea into the world.
Totally.
And which kind of, I don't know exactly what position he would take, but it's kind of at odds with saying like, that's mine. I made that. I own that.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's more like I brought this to us, but I did it with stuff that I found in the world before. And there's people who will come after me who will do stuff with my stuff. And so, like I said, I'm a fan of all these artists getting paid for their work. And I like to create online too. So, I'm more like team artist. But I'm not sure how we should adjudicate this. So so you really want to break it down to the atomic unit is like, let's say that from a Daft Punk synth perspective, a sine wave. Does anybody own a sine wave? I don't think so.
Hope not.
What if I modulate it just a little bit?
Yeah.
Is that my sound? Like if you sort of go really reductionist on it, it's hard to say where there's like these very specific moments of creation.
Totally.
It feels like a huge continuum. And so then if I take that, I'm not really sure how we can have some legislator decide for us and tell us what we should be doing. But I don't really buy that side of it either, because I don't think necessarily people legislating these things are going to make really great decisions. So I'm kind of left thinking it's kind of more, and the reason I triggered this is you mentioned the curator. I'm almost more of the mindset that like whoever's exposing it to the audiences are the ones that are kind of like doing the unique thing. Like they're matching this set of ideas that humanity has been curating since, or have been creating since the sine wave. And they're sort of ushering that into, their market making and matching that idea with the people who presumably would like it. And if they make bad decisions, they're going to lose that audience.
Totally.
So I almost wonder, this is kind of a bizarre idea, but I almost wonder if like the audiences are really kind of how like the only way for artists to capture value, and the actual creative process can be used to build audiences, but the creative process doesn't end up netting ownership in the way we think about today.
Totally. Well, okay. So it's a fascinating conversation to have, and probably one that we'll be having for years, because I don't think this answer is going to just like show itself immediately. Couple of initial thoughts. One, I've never been a big fan of IP. Like I am very much of the mindset that information wants to be free, let it be free.
Yep.
It's better for humanity. I'm also of the mindset that I would love to see artists like live like a comfortable lifestyle.
Yep.
So I think those two things are things that I at least now believe and don't believe have to be at odds. I think, legislating or forcing it, probably not the right answer. And so then I think the interesting question becomes, well, what, I always kind of like when we talk about with Kevin Kelly, like what does technology want, right?
Yeah.
Like as he asks, or what does nature, like what is the natural evolutionary next step, right? And so we've talked a lot about this. It's not just with art either, right? We've talked a lot about open source software. I think you and I are both very much fans of open source as much of the software as possible.
Yeah.
And there's still going to be ways to monetize, right? Like one way I've always thought about the open source software thing, or one thing that's like really distilled to me is you always pay for something, right? Like whether you pay for it in money because you're a company and you're rich in money and poor on time, or you pay for it with time because you're poor on money but rich with time. Like there are different trades that you can orchestrate, right?
Yep.
So the code itself being free means more distribution. More distribution means more opportunity to layer on whatever it is, hosting opportunities in the future, service agreements, other business models. So I think that something similar is going to happen here. I was discussing with a few people, I think, a while ago, this idea of the kind of like the music is going to be free, but there's probably a way to be creative with the business model around the shelling point for the distribution of that model, of that music. So one idea that we were kind of bouncing around, if you remember, some artists like Radiohead have tried just like giving their music away for free in Rainbows. They just dropped for free. Tom York did the exact same thing with Tomorrow's Modern Boxes and probably other albums since then. And interestingly enough, they released on BitTorrent with the option to pay. And I did pay because I was like, you know what? I support this guy.
Yep.
And so I think one possibility is I think pure quote unquote altruism or patronage can work if you have a big enough audience. I think they've proven that. Other ancillary business models like the shows or whatever, that can also potentially work. But I think there's probably a new opportunity that we haven't seen, which ties in the point about the curators. And so the thing, by the way, I very much agree with you. That's where a lot of the value and the scarcity is. In fact, I was on another podcast recently, and like one of my big takeaways, one of my mic drop moments, if you will, was, the best entrepreneurs, what it really comes down to is taste. Taste is in some ways the scarce asset.
Yeah.
Taste. It's always taste. Same thing with curators and artists here. And so one idea that we were playing around with is there a way to incentivize your audience? Like, can you align incentives such that they grow the pie and you both win? And so imagine for a minute, you download, we were talking about this in the context of BitTorrent, you release a file and gets your new song. And once that information's out there, anyone can rip it and release their file. Information's free, and it should be. Yep. Information wants to be free. Let's not force a square block in a round hole or whatever the saying is. Yeah. And so, but if I can authenticate, if I'm Tom York or Cypher Perro or whoever, and I can authenticate, okay, this is my track. And you know that because my NPub signed it. Mm-hmm. Now, chances are the file that came from my private key is likely to become the shelling point because it came from me. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then one thing you could imagine doing is saying, okay, Zap splits are going to get built into this, but they're going to get built into a tree based on the file that I originate. So I drop the original track, and then I say anyone that links back to this file and gets a cut of that, whether it's through their own VJ show or DJ show, right, whether it's remixing it, whatever. Whoever takes this, does something with it, shares it with their audience, they are now incentivized, like they get a cut of all revenue shared anywhere from this track.
Right.
And so the idea is, can you turn that into something where everyone wants to grow the pie of this original track?
Right.
I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, but I think there's something really interesting to experiment with there.
Yeah. I guess like as we have more, like we've micronized all of the, all of the building blocks. When they're smaller, they can be remixed and rebuilt and pointed in different directions, and kind of it feels more like water flowing.
Exactly.
Versus kind of the old style is like we have these contracts and you sign them in a wet signature and you do something every 6 months. Now things can be more real time and composable and remixed in a way.
In remix, and I think again, and I don't have the exact answer on this, but I think for me the core insight is, can we align incentives so everyone wants to grow the pie? Mm-hmm. Like, can we get out of the scarcity mindset of like, oh, like there's only so many album sales? Actually, no. Like we can actually have like kind of like with the open source software thing. And I mean, we talked about this maybe in the last show, but Albi released that new functionality and with their API, they were experimenting with, I don't know if it was NPM or one of these like packet libraries. The idea of what if, and today again, it's going back to voluntary zapping. I don't know if voluntary zapping is the big opportunity. It may be, it may not be. But imagine, I release a popular open source packet and it's used everywhere. And anyone that uses my thing in the future, if there's ever a zap to any project, I always get some tiny cut. Maybe it's only a Satoshi or whatever, but if it's in 100 million places, that gets pretty interesting. Right. And so I think, just this idea of if you can, like Bitcoin, align incentives so everyone wants to build up the original file, there's an interesting model there.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And one idea that's kind of Nostr related of this is, and I don't have a good handle on what this might be like, but has there been any more? How closely do we think about code, kind of executable code instead of just data, right? Like today relays host data but don't really host code,
right?
But like, does it fit pretty well to take like executable code, open source code, and host them on relays, or have relays somehow contribute to the assembly of which app I should be using, or help point me towards the place where I should be getting code to do the next thing I want to do?
Maybe. I mean, I haven't thought about if it's like the relays themselves, but where I do think a very important primitive in this world we're heading for is the old world of software was zero marginal cost.
Right.
I build a product once or a piece of software once, I can distribute it for free.
Yeah.
In the world of computation, it's not free. And maybe one day it will get close to free, but at least today I have real GPU costs, I have real electricity costs.
Yep.
So I think another possibility is, and this is something that also I think Pablo and Gigi have talked about, the data will always be free. And maybe as a relay, it's kind of like my loss leader. I give away all the data for free or whatever. But if you want to manipulate the data, which requires computation, there's some markup on that.
Right.
Because you always are going to have to pay for the computation. As long as electricity is not completely free and the GPU is not completely free, there's going to be some real world cost that has to get paid there.
Yeah. Makes sense. So in a sense, the GPU execution does it relate to being like a tastemaker? It's almost, because you're talking about how the taste is the thing that matters. Is it like a computational version of taste?
I'm not sure I get what you mean there. What do you mean?
Might be too far afield, but you were talking about.
I like it. Let's go all the way. Yeah.
You were talking about how kind of taste is kind of the ultimate, kind of the final. I don't know how you
scarce resource.
Yeah, scarce resource. But so are these like the computation on top of the data is a form of taste making of that data? Like which data I pull, how I compute, what the algorithm is that computes that is a flavor of that kind of that it's like an embodied taste, like an expressed.
Well, maybe. I mean, I could see it going even in two different ways though, right? Because when I was talking about computation, I'm just saying like, imagine for a minute there is no taste and you are the taste maker, but I own the actual like GPU that does the cycle, the inference. You could imagine that as the taste maker, you still have to pay me something or someone something, maybe the marginal cost, or maybe the cost gets driven down to like cost because there is no profit margin of like, if everyone's out there competing, or it's like very, very tiny. It's like mining, is going to go to there. Another way to look at it though, is like maybe you combine those two things and it's like, if you have the best taste and curation, you point people to your relay and you earn the right to then point them to your computation. Maybe you have a higher markup, but people don't care because you have the best data feeds or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, people always pay for brand, right?
Yeah, totally. Not always. Some of us are very cheap, but a lot of people.
Well, even if you're cheap, though, I'm not claiming that you're, I don't know, wearing Gucci, but I think brand still is like a shortcut to help us make decisions.
Totally.
And so we pay to just take the defaults in a sense, right? Like
totally
on a lot of decisions that we don't want to think too much about.
Well, one thing that always I thought about, in the crypto markets, and I think this is actually very interesting for the future of Alpi as well.
Slowly, crypto.
Exactly. Like, do you remember? So MetaMask at one point was doing crazy swap volume, and people could have easily have gone to Uniswap or whatever to do the swap there. It was cheaper. But they would pay the 1% markup just because they didn't want to leave there, and they knew MetaMask and it was easy, and just like people like will pay for convenience and defaults and brand. And like, that's a great business model. If you're doing whatever, 100 million trades or whatever, and you've got 1%, and sure, anyone could go do it cheaper, but like they're not because it's easy or because they know your brand, they trust you.
Yeah. I mean, you have to transfer something out. There's some risk in there that you do something wrong. So
it's a pain in the ass. I pay 1%. I know it's going to work. Cool. Sounds fair.
Yeah. Seems like a very reasonable business model and a reasonable way to sort of create value and be able to capture some of the value that you're creating. So
totally, yeah. And again, comes back taste, trust, brand. These are all things that are pretty valuable in that world.
Yep. Cool. It's a very kind of Kevin Kelly homage.
Hey, one day, by the way, we should find a way to get Kevin Kelly on here. That would be like a dream come true.
Oh yeah.
If anyone knows Kevin Kelly, we'd love that guy.
We love him.
Two more things I wanted to mention quickly. I don't know what else is top of mind
yeah.
for you. One is just touching on Lightning Network for a second.
You mentioned something about. I think I've got that chart up that you were pointing out the Kevin Rook post, right? Is this the one?
This is one of the two things for sure.
Okay.
So one is for those of you who haven't seen, I think this is the Albi one.
Yeah.
This was just crazy to me. Albi released this data with Kevin that they did over 1 million payments in August.
So that's unit payments,
Yes,
like
individual payments.
Individual. Okay.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I think Wallet of Satoshi, everyone thought was kind of like the number one wallet. And obviously they're doing a lot as well, but I think they were like 600, 700K payments. The general point to me here is, and I think Sam Wouters or Waiter, I don't know how you say his name, at River was putting out some research. He's done some really nice reports, but he and Boomy were having some, back and forth on Twitter trying to understand what this data means. I think the high level takeaway is there's more activity happening on the Lightning Network than anyone thought. Now, I'm not saying we're doing huge volumes yet. Right. And obviously, because it's a peer-to-peer onion routed network like Tor, by design, you can't know any of this data, which is like both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on your perspective.
So you can't know the data, but how does he have the data?
Companies can report from their individual nodes,
okay.
right? And so if you can collect from enough of these different sources, you can start piecing some of that together. But like I think 2 years ago or in 2021, there was estimates coming out from Arcane Crypto, maybe, that like there's only a couple 100K payments on the Lightning Network, period. Mm-hmm. And then he gave a talk maybe a couple weeks ago in Europe somewhere, one of those Bitcoin conferences, estimating that there's maybe like 1 million total payments on the network on his like lower conservative end.
Right.
Well, Albi just came out and said, actually, no, that's just one company.
Right.
And so anyways, this to me though is just like everyone that I've shown this to has just been like, wait, really?
Yeah.
It's a very encouraging sign to me that there's a lot more, and a lot of this we know is coming from Nostr because of Nostr Wallet Connect. Again, very small average payment size, I would guess. Yeah. But still, like 1 million.
I mean, small average payment size is what you'd hope because that fits the use case. That's something you can't do in the rest of the world. So I kind of like hearing that. If you're saying, oh, you're paying $50 equivalent in Lightning, I'm kind of like, well, why don't you just swipe your credit card or Stripe or whatever? But I think that's actually a reason to be optimistic. Is that you're hearing small payments, so people are, Zaps are a great example, and there's probably others.
Totally. So anyway, I just thought this was worth mentioning because it surprised a lot of the industry insiders. Like, wait a second, we're actually doing more than we realized.
Right. What's the sort of, I don't know, I see some people kind of disbelieving Lightning or kind of trashing it, and then there's a lot of people, some of our friends are working hard every day to make it successful, and I wonder, like, where do you stand on, like, why are the haters hating? Like, what's their position?
Well, I think one reasonable criticism is it's taken longer than a lot of us would have hoped. And I am also in the camp of like, look, most people I know are not using Lightning. Mm-hmm. I wish they were. Mm-hmm. And, I think that if you zoom out, the Lightning white paper dropped in 2017, I guess, 2018, or maybe it was 2016. I don't know. But like 2018 is when people really started running nodes. It was very niche. 2020, 2021, things get started a little bit, more slightly professional in the last year or two. I mean, you have to also remember up until 2 years ago, there was almost no venture capital. Like Lightning Labs raised like a 10 mil Series A, and that's about it. Then in the last 10 years, you see they raise a B, tens of millions. Lightspark comes out and raises, River raises a B, Zebedee raises an A. So, or maybe there was a B as well. So you're just starting to see some of these companies get capitalized in the last 2 years. So when you zoom out, like, I still think we're like actually moving pretty quickly, but I definitely understand the criticism of like, look, I wish this thing had happened much faster. I also think that a lot of people, again, it's the data, like the industry insiders had no idea how many payments are being done.
Right.
And so if you're used to looking at, quote unquote crypto, and you're like looking at, okay, well, like how much money is locked up in Uniswap or in some of these other protocols. Well, that has nothing to do with this because, River, Alex Leishman was talking on the Kevin Rook podcast recently. It was very good about like, look, we just closed a whole bunch of our channels with River, and that has nothing to do with like our, the number of payments we're routing is increasing, but it's a very capital efficient network, and we're getting more and more efficient with how we route, right? So if I'm sending a Satoshi back and forth at the speed of light, there's a lot of payments I can do with that.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with total volume locked. Like the number of coins locked up has been going down, but number of payments has clearly been going up a lot
So
more
just
than people realize.
efficiency is what we would attribute that to.
Exactly.
And then speaking of these guys, I think, was it last night, Brian Armstrong from Coinbase?
So that was the other story.
Yeah.
Why don't you take this one? Yeah.
Well, no, you can represent it because I didn't follow it super closely. I just saw the headline.
Well, neither did I, but I loved your tweet about this. So maybe you'll share your tweet because it was funny.
What was my tweet? I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm going to see if I can quote myself here. What did I say?
It was actually pretty funny.
So I retweeted. So Brian Armstrong said, "The team did a great job digging into this, and we've made the decision to integrate Lightning. Bitcoin is the most important asset in crypto, and we're excited to do our part to enable faster, cheaper Bitcoin transactions." And yeah, okay, so my quote was, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice."
I have nothing else to add. Agreed.
So, Coinbase was a Bitcoin company.
Without
before,
a doubt.
Right? And here we are, what is it? Are we 13 years later? Something
like that.
Something like that. Maybe 12 or 13, but we're 12 or 13 years later, and they're saying it's the most important asset in crypto.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, think what you want about Coinbase. Obviously, I'm not a fan of all the DeFi and whatever stuff they've done, but at the end of the day, they onboarded a lot of people to Bitcoin, and they obviously are a public company with incredible technical talent inside. And them integrating Lightning for all of their user base is a big deal. And this comes on the heels. We haven't talked since Binance also integrated Lightning. They went from being nothing to now I think they're a top 10 node by capacity on the network already. I'm sure Coinbase will be a top 10 node by capacity very quickly.
So Binance has it launched already?
Yeah. And so I think that these were the last two big holdouts of major exchanges, and they also happen to be like the two biggest. In addition, you already had the early adopters like Bitfinex and Kraken and River, but like this is a huge deal. Their user bases are both massive, and I don't know. I think it's a much bigger deal than people realize. Like all of their users now, and by the way, you can start seeing a lot more ARB opportunities, right? Like imagine if you can move instantly between exchanges like River and Kraken and Coinbase and Binance at the speed of light.
Right.
That's going to be some really interesting opportunities.
Right. So kind of the SBF Bitcoin trading.
I'm not saying that's what I want to do or whatever, but like
let's go do quant trading on Lightning.
It will happen. Yeah.
Seems credible whenever there's a big chance like this. Kind of a big change like this with kind of a lot more volume. But I think it'd be good for, I'm sure somebody will opportunistically find that and do it and probably generate a lot of volume and
more
make some money for
volume,
themselves.
more routing fees, more exposure. Generally good.
It's great. Do you know, so I know it's kind of the onion router kind of Tor style, probably doesn't give a lot of visibility, but do we know anything about, I don't know, the news reports of why Binance made the decision or what people are doing with it? Or
Well, I think the first reason was, obviously a lot of people, I'm assuming have asked for it at some point, although it wasn't like a huge business need. Because imagine if you're a big business and you have lots of tokens listed, you either list a new token, make more money.
Right.
And in some ways you don't even want to integrate Lightning because you don't really want people moving the money off your exchange anyway. If you're one of these exchanges like River do. But I think the big thing was frankly just the chain fees. Like when the ordinals pop happened 6 months ago or whatever that was, all of a sudden just the fees spiked. And ever since then, it's not all ordinals. I'm sure there's other stuff happening, but the mempool is not cleared. And so
it's still not right now?
I don't think so. The last time I checked.
That's you don't, but you're saying you don't know if it's because of the ordinal stuff specifically, or
well, I know ordinals were part of the original reason. I don't know if they still are or not. I haven't, been following that as closely. But in general, when fees are expensive, these exchanges, my understanding is, are eating those fees for their customers. And so if they can save meaningful costs, all of a sudden, okay, well, this moves the deal for the business. That's why I think they're integrating it now.
Yep.
But I think it's going to have a lot of interesting second order effects. One other thing I did just want to mention, to be fair, because I think there's a very big criticism of Lightning that came out of the AI for All hackathon that I would love to see this problem solved. And that criticism is, the whole like AI is paying AIs and Lightning. I think it really makes sense to me that like energy-backed money sent at the speed of light, like JP Morgan not banking the AIs. I am sure on that.
Right.
But from what we found, there's a lot of hackers that think this is cool. And even at some of the bigger companies, some of whom were involved with the hackathon, I don't know who I can share and who I can't, but the point is the engineers were like, yo, this is dope. We would love to integrate this. And even the CEOs of some of these companies are like, this is dope. We'd love to integrate this. And then there would be some pushback from compliance people, regulatory people, even just accountants that are either like, one, how do we deal with Bitcoin on the balance sheet? Like, is this like a threat to us? Like what does that mean? Or as simple as like, yo, like, is this thing going to go up, going to go down? Dude, this is not our business model. Why are we like trading Forex? Like, just doesn't make sense for us. And so I think the killer thing that is still missing, and this could come in many form factors, and I know companies are working on this. I think Strike, released something like this, but I haven't confirmed. I think it's in the roadmap for some other companies as well. But it's just like a very simple thing. Pay a Lightning address, get paid out in dollars. Mm-hmm. That's it. And you could do this in a way with like...
Paid out in dollars that flows through like stable coins, or that... How do you...
Well, this is the question, right? Because there's many ways you could do this. I think for a lot of these legacy tech companies, they're going to need it in a bank account. So not stable coins or ever is my guess, but just like straight up get paid Lightning, all of a sudden deposit dollars.
You got like an ACH connection to them.
Exactly. Okay. And that's kind of what Strike either does now, or I assume will do very soon. Mm-hmm. Another option is you could do what Lightning Labs has been working on, Taproot assets, and you could just have stable coins. So in the way that it's currently flowing on Tron or whatever, it just comes back to Lightning because it's interoperable, it's faster, it's cheaper, blah, blah, blah. And you just get paid in stable coins, you hold your stable coins, great. Another option is you can use what Galoy, and I think Fedi is now working with as well, which is stable stats, and that's kind of a synthetic dollar, which you basically take a long and short position simultaneously and create a synthetic dollar. That has some issues because right now they're using centralized exchanges, which, you know, that has its own set of problems, but it's a way to get dollar representation value. My understanding, though, for the companies is probably you need like regulated bank accounts to make this work to get started. Mm-hmm. I think that's what we're missing.
Cool. Well,
I don't know who's going to solve it. If you're out there and you're listening, you're going to solve that, let us know. But that's like the final piece, I think.
Right. How's the overall, like, I know you sort of started HiveMind as a kind of, was the first fund was very Lightning focused and the second fund is Nostr focused? Is that the right timing? And have you found you're talking a lot about Lightning stuff. Are you finding more new opportunities in Lightning to sort of fund people building new things in Lightning, or are you sort of a mix of Lightning Nostr, or still pretty exclusively Nostr, or how do you sort of...
Well, look, first of all, I'm open-minded, right? Yeah. Things can change. So the way I kind of thought about Fund 1 is that it was very Lightning infrastructure, right? So a lot of those companies were companies that were building core infrastructure or neobanks to get in and out of local currency to Lightning. Yeah. And some apps, but like majority infrastructure. Now I'm thinking we're kind of entering the Lightning application phase. And there's going to be many things that bring Lightning into the application phase. I think Nostr is going to be a huge one. Yeah. I think some of this Edge AI stuff could be very interesting. And maybe there's going to be other protocols or other stuff as well. But like, I do think it's finally time to actually start like building end user experiences with Lightning. So that's kind of where I'm focused now. The last, for example, couple of things, like in Fund 1, obviously did like, companies like Stacker News, which is a little bit of an application. But like this GPUTopia thing, like that's a new app that just like straight up, couldn't have existed 2 years ago. And now it's kind of the apps that I'm doing. So I'm excited about that. And yeah, man, I'm really curious to see what comes. I'm really excited to see what comes out of the Nostr hackathon coming up with, Nostrasia. I will put a plug out there as well. I haven't released this publicly, but I am going to be looking potentially to bring someone on board to help me as kind of like a chief of staff role. There's a lot that I'm trying to figure out right now. Nice. So maybe someone listening, if you're in the deep cut right now, that could be something interesting. But yeah, look.
And what's the ideal background, or what do you have in mind?
Well, I mean, again, right now at HiveMind, it's just me. And so kind of solo GP, want to keep it that way from the investment perspective. But, there's a lot that goes into supporting our current companies. Frankly, a lot of like administrative stuff I could use help with. And, what my dream is to be able to free myself up as much as possible to go out there and live on the very edge of Nostr, find some of the weird stuff as it's being, brought up. And, so someone that can really help me manage some of the administrative stuff, but also really help support a lot of our companies. And there'll be other, looking at the edge as well. Yeah. We'll see all that goes. But I am personally more bullish than ever. I know a lot of the market is like scared and skeptical, but the way I look at it is like, and by the way, we haven't even talked about, the energy price of Bitcoin, which is this whole thing Charles Capriol has. Like, this is a whole other podcast to discuss, like looking at the cost to produce Bitcoin versus the current price. Right. It's one of the stronger signals, I believe, that he's talked about in a long time. The halving is coming up next year. I think there's just like a lot of really good forces behind us, but right now a lot of people are scared if they're not deep in it.
Yep. Cool. Well, if you're looking for that kind of helper or kind of teammate coming up, I would recommend. I've actually just recently helped another friend who's running a venture capital firm find, I think, a similar type of role.
Oh, cool.
And speaking of plugs, get on the Founders You Should Know.
Oh yeah, badass.
So we have a Slack community where we help people who are kind of looking to kind of transition in tech and find their new role, something that they'd like to kind of work on and focus on. So we actually had a role that we posted recently that got a lot of attention, which was with a friend who runs a venture capital firm and was looking for kind of somebody to help out in various ways. So that's a good place to post.
I will actually. Yeah. And by the way, if y'all haven't heard of this, DK and his wife run an incredible program, Founders You Should Know, which I think is probably the highest signal founder group in SF I've seen. A lot of cool stuff around AI, everything else. Maybe one day Nostr, but if you haven't checked that out, you should definitely check out their community. It's dope.
Yeah, thank you. It's foundersysk.com. So pop on over. If you're in San Francisco, apply to come to the show. We do an in-person show.
They're good.
Which
They're
will be
really
going,
good.
Actually, it's a week from today is the next one.
Will you sing in this one?
I won't be singing at this. I have my next track already written.
Ooh.
Did I tell you what it is?
No.
Oh, it's Taylor Swift.
Alpha drop right here.
Taylor Swift. Shake It Off. Okay. But instead of the chorus being Shake It Off, it's AGI.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
So I've got it mostly written. I think we're going to probably perform it at the October 25th Founders You Should Know as the intermission.
I definitely want to come for that.
Yeah. Cool.
Sweet. Well, awesome, DK. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, great to hang, great to chat. And I think we've got to get this thing going to upload so that we can pop over to our next engagement.
Exactly, man.
Okay.
All right. See y'all soon. Bye-bye.